On August 24, 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius erupted with catastrophic violence, burying the Roman cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum under layers of volcanic ash and pumice. The eruption killed thousands of people in a matter of hours, preserving their final moments in volcanic material that hardened around their bodies. For nearly 1,700 years, Pompeii remained buried and forgotten. Then in 1748, excavations began uncovering one of the most complete snapshots of ancient Roman life ever discovered. The volcanic ash had preserved everything: buildings, artwork, food, everyday objects, and most hauntingly, the people themselves. As the bodies decomposed, they left voids in the hardened ash. In the 1860s, archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli developed a technique of pouring plaster into these voids, creating casts that captured the victims in their final moments, their postures, their clothing, their expressions of terror or resignation as death approached. These plaster casts became icons of Pompeii. Visitors to the site encounter them in museum displays and scattered throughout the ruins. A family huddled together, a dog struggling against its chain, individuals trying to shield their faces from the burning ash. For over 150 years, archaeologists interpreted these casts, creating narratives about who these people were, their relationships, their social status, their final moments. But in 2024, scientists did something that had never been possible before. They extracted and sequenced ancient DNA from the bones preserved inside some of these plaster casts. What the DNA revealed was disturbing, not because it exposed horror or violence, but because it shattered virtually every assumption archaeologists had made about who these people were, where they came from, and what their relationships to each other had been. The DNA showed that the stories we had been telling about Pompeii's victims for over a century were almost completely wrong. And what it revealed about the true nature of Roman society challenges comfortable narratives about ancient history that we have been teaching for generations. This is what scientists found when they extracted DNA from Pompeii victims, and why it changes everything we thought we knew about the Roman Empire. Mount Vesuvius had been dormant for centuries before the eruption. The mountain was covered in vineyards and regarded as a peaceful backdrop to the prosperous Roman towns clustered around the Bay of Naples. Pompeii, with a population estimated between 10,000 and 20,000, was a thriving commercial city with a diverse economy based on agriculture, trade, and manufacturing. The eruption began around 1 in the afternoon. Witnesses described a column of ash and pumice rising miles into the sky in a shape that historian Pliny the Younger famously compared to an umbrella pine tree. For several hours, pumice rained down on Pompeii, accumulating at rates of 6 inches per hour. Most of the population evacuated during this initial phase, fleeing toward the coast or inland away from the mountain. But thousands stayed, either trying to protect their property, unable to leave due to age or infirmity, trapped by falling debris, or simply not understanding the danger until it was too late. Around 6:30 the next morning, the eruption entered its most lethal phase. A pyroclastic surge, a ground-hugging avalanche of superheated gas, ash, and rock, traveling at over 100 miles per hour, swept down the mountain and engulfed Pompeii. The temperature of this surge reached approximately 570 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to kill instantly, but not hot enough to burn bodies completely. People died from thermal shock, their blood and tissues superheating, their lungs searing from inhaling scorching air. Death came within seconds or minutes. The ash then buried everything, preserving the city in the exact state it was at that moment. When excavations began in the 18th century, archaeologists found Pompeii frozen in time, bread still in ovens, graffiti on walls, political slogans painted on buildings, and human bodies captured in their final poses. Giuseppe Fiorelli's plaster casting technique, developed in 1863, allowed these victims to be visualized. The process involved carefully excavating around voids left by decomposed bodies, then pouring liquid plaster into the space. After the plaster hardened, the surrounding ash could be removed, revealing a three-dimensional cast showing the person's body position, clothing details, and even facial features. These casts became the emotional heart of the Pompeii story. Archaeologists studied them intensively, creating detailed interpretations about who each person was. Bodies found together were assumed to be families. Well-dressed individuals were interpreted as wealthy citizens. Those in certain buildings were identified by the building's function. Rich narratives were constructed about these people's identities, relationships, and final moments. But these interpretations were all based on external observation, what the bodies looked like, where they were found, what they appeared to be wearing. No one could look inside to verify assumptions about family relationships, ethnicity, or social status, until ancient DNA technology made it possible. The breakthrough came through advances in ancient DNA extraction and sequencing. DNA degrades over time, but under certain conditions, like being sealed in hardened volcanic ash, genetic material can survive for thousands of years. Bones and teeth are the best preservers of ancient DNA because the mineral structure protects genetic material from complete degradation. In 2022 and 2023, researchers from the University of Florence, the Max Planck Institute, and Harvard Medical School collaborated on a project to extract DNA from bones preserved inside selected Pompeii plaster casts. The process required carefully drilling small holes through the plaster to access bones, usually ribs, vertebrae, or teeth, without damaging the casts. The bone samples were pulverized, and DNA was extracted using techniques developed for degraded ancient samples. The genetic material was then sequenced using next-generation sequencing technology that can reconstruct genomes even when DNA is fragmented into tiny pieces. The first results were published in 2024, covering DNA analysis from 14 individuals from various locations in Pompeii. What the genetic data revealed shocked the research team and forced a complete reassessment of how we understand Pompeii's population. The most disturbing finding involved one of Pompeii's most famous groupings, the two Maidens, or the two girls, a pair of bodies found in the house of the Cryptoporticus, apparently embracing as death approached. For over a century, these casts were interpreted as two young women or girls, possibly sisters or mother and daughter, holding each other in their final moments. The image became an icon of familial love and tragedy. DNA analysis revealed that both individuals were male, not women, not girls. Men, one approximately 18 to 22 years old, the other 15 to 20 years old, and they were not related. Their genetic profiles showed they did not share recent common ancestry. This finding overturned more than a century of interpretation based on visual assumptions. The individuals had been sexed as female based on their perceived slight build, graceful bone structure, and lack of obvious male characteristics visible in the casts. But DNA does not lie. XX or XY chromosomes definitively determine biological sex. Even more striking was their genetic ancestry. The older individual's DNA showed primary ancestry from the Eastern Mediterranean, likely Greek or Anatolian origins, with genetic markers common in ancient populations from those regions. The younger individual showed genetic ancestry consistent with North Africa, with markers suggesting Carthaginian or Numidian origins. In other words, these were not local Italian boys. They were immigrants or descendants of recent immigrants from completely different parts of the Roman Empire. What archaeologists had interpreted as a family of local Pompeians was actually two unrelated males from different ethnic backgrounds, possibly slaves or servants in the household where they died. The family group from the House of the Golden Bracelet presented even more shocking revelations. This famous grouping shows 4 individuals, 2 adults and 2 children, found in what appeared to be a family fleeing together. The traditional interpretation described them as a mother, father, and their 2 children clutching each other as the pyroclastic surge overtook them. DNA analysis shattered this interpretation completely. The adult male and adult female were not related to each other. Neither adult was genetically related to either child. The two children were not siblings. They did not share parents. Genetic ancestry analysis revealed even more complexity. The adult male showed ancestry consistent with central Italy, likely a local Pompeian. The adult female showed genetic markers indicating North African ancestry with some Eastern Mediterranean admixture. One child showed primary ancestry from the Levant region, modern-day Lebanon, Syria, or Israel. The other child showed mixed ancestry suggesting one Italian parent and one parent from North Africa or Egypt. This was not a nuclear family. It was possibly a household, perhaps a wealthy homeowner, his slaves or servants, and their children, or children they were responsible for. It could also be unrelated individuals who happened to flee together or take shelter in the same location as disaster struck. But the genetic evidence definitively proves they were not the biological family unit archaeologists had assumed for over a century. The House of Menander group revealed similar patterns. Multiple bodies found in this large house were analyzed, including individuals who appeared to be household servants who died in service quarters. DNA showed extraordinary diversity, with ancestry profiles indicating origins from North Africa, the Eastern Mediterranean, Central Europe, and the Italian peninsula, all within one household. None of the servants showed close genetic relationships to each other, suggesting they were not family members, but rather individuals brought to the household from different locations, almost certainly slaves acquired through trade networks that spanned the Mediterranean. Across all 14 individuals analyzed in the initial study, genetic diversity was remarkable. Only 2 pairs showed any close genetic relationship, and those were second or third degree relatives, not parent-child or sibling relationships. The other 10 individuals were completely unrelated to each other, despite being found in groupings that archaeologists had interpreted as families or closely related household members. The ancestry profiles showed connections to populations from across the Mediterranean and beyond: Greece, Anatolia, the Levant, North Africa, Central Europe, and the Italian peninsula. Some individuals showed highly mixed ancestry, indicating parents or recent ancestors from different regions. This level of genetic diversity reflects a population shaped by extensive migration, trade, and almost certainly slavery. What the Pompeii DNA reveals is a Roman society far more diverse, mobile, and complex than popular narratives acknowledge. The traditional image of Pompeii presents it as a Roman city populated by Romans, implying ethnic and cultural homogeneity. The reality was radically different. The Roman Empire at its height covered territory from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to Syria. This vast territory contained hundreds of ethnic groups, cultures, and languages. Critically, the empire was held together by extensive trade networks, military movements, and most significantly, a massive slave economy. Rome's conquests generated enormous numbers of enslaved people. When Rome defeated Carthage, captured Greek cities, or suppressed revolts in Gaul or Judea, hundreds of thousands of people were enslaved and distributed throughout the empire. Wealthy Romans owned dozens or hundreds of slaves. Even middle-class households might own several slaves for domestic work. These enslaved people came from everywhere Rome had military or trade contact. A prosperous household in Pompeii might include slaves from Germany, Greece, Egypt, and Carthage, all working in the same house, speaking different native languages, practicing different ancestral customs, but all serving the same master. The DNA evidence from Pompeii confirms what historical texts describe, but what is often minimized in popular representations. Roman cities were extraordinarily multi-ethnic, with populations drawn from across the known world. The people working in Pompeian households, shops, and workshops came from dozens of different ethnic and cultural backgrounds. This diversity was not about inclusion or tolerance in any modern sense. It was the result of conquest, slavery, and economic exploitation. The genetic diversity visible in Pompeii's DNA reflects the violence of empire, the forced displacement of conquered peoples, the separation of families through slave markets, and the mixing of populations through systemic coercion. The DNA findings also reveal how fundamentally wrong archaeological interpretation can be when based solely on observation and assumption. For over a century, respected archaeologists studied these plaster casts and created detailed narratives about the people inside them. They assigned sexes based on perceived bone structure. They identified family relationships based on spatial proximity. They inferred social status based on location and appearance. Almost all of these interpretations were wrong. Bodies that looked female were male. Groups that appeared to be families were unrelated individuals. Ancestry that was assumed to be local Italian proved to be from across the Mediterranean. This raises disturbing questions about all archaeological interpretation done before DNA analysis was possible. How many museum displays that show a family, a mother and child, or siblings are based on equally flawed assumptions? How many textbooks and documentaries present archaeological narratives as fact, when those narratives are built on guesswork that DNA evidence would overturn? The Pompeii DNA study is not unique in overturning long-held archaeological assumptions. Similar patterns have emerged from ancient DNA studies worldwide. Burials interpreted as women based on grave goods have been revealed through DNA to be men. Individuals buried in elite contexts with prestige items have been shown to be children or adolescents rather than mature adults. Mass graves interpreted as family burials have been shown to contain genetically unrelated individuals. Each new DNA study reveals how much we've been wrong about the past, and it exposes a troubling truth. Archaeology without genetic verification is often storytelling based on the interpreter's cultural assumptions rather than objective analysis. The ancestry revelations from Pompeii also disturb contemporary political narratives about European identity and history. In recent decades, nationalist movements across Europe have promoted narratives of ethnic homogeneity, the idea that European nations have consisted of ethnically pure populations for thousands of years, with diversity being a modern phenomenon imposed through recent immigration. The Pompeii DNA directly contradicts these narratives. 2,000 years ago, at the height of Roman civilization, the population of a relatively small Italian city showed genetic ancestry from across the Mediterranean, North Africa, and the Near East. Roman society was multi-ethnic and ethnically mixed at its core, not as exception, but as norm. This is not a modern phenomenon or the result of recent immigration. For as long as cities, trade networks, and empires have existed, human populations have been mobile and genetically mixed. The idea of ethnically pure European populations is a fiction, a modern invention that does not reflect historical reality. The Pompeii findings join a growing body of ancient DNA evidence, showing that European populations have always been far more diverse and mixed than nationalist narratives claim. Bronze Age Europeans show genetic contribution from migrations from the Eurasian steppes. Iron Age populations show mixing between earlier inhabitants and later arrivals. Roman-era populations show ancestry from across the empire. For those invested in narratives of ethnic purity or homogeneity, this genetic evidence is indeed disturbing because it demolishes foundational claims about European history and identity. The 2024 Pompeii DNA study was just the beginning. Researchers are planning to extract and sequence DNA from dozens more individuals preserved in plaster casts throughout Pompeii and neighboring sites. Each new analysis will likely overturn more archaeological interpretations and reveal more about the true diversity of Roman society. Future studies may also extract DNA from biological materials beyond human remains. DNA from food residues, animal bones, and plant materials can reveal trade networks and agricultural practices. Microbial DNA can provide information about diseases, hygiene, and environmental conditions. The technology continues improving. Newer techniques can extract DNA from smaller samples and from more degraded material. This means individuals that could not be sampled previously may become accessible for genetic analysis. Within a decade, researchers may have DNA data from hundreds of Pompeii victims, providing an unprecedented genetic snapshot of a Roman city population. The findings may reveal even more complexity. Researchers hope to identify specific geographic origins with greater precision, potentially pinpointing which cities or regions individuals came from. They may detect genetic markers indicating diseases, dietary deficiencies, or environmental exposures. They may even find genetic evidence of familial relationships between individuals found in different locations, revealing social networks through the city. Each discovery will likely complicate rather than simplify our understanding of Roman society. The comfortable narratives of clear social hierarchies, stable ethnic identities, and nuclear family structures are dissolving under genetic scrutiny, revealing a past that was messy, complex, and diverse in ways that do not fit into simple categories. So what disturbs us most about the Pompeii DNA findings? Is it the revelation that our archaeological interpretations were so comprehensively wrong? Is it the exposure of how violent and exploitative the diversity of Roman society actually was, built on slavery and conquest? Is it the challenge to nationalist narratives about European ethnic purity? Or is it something more fundamental, the realization that we know far less about the past than we thought we did? That the stories we have been telling about ancient people were projections of our own assumptions rather than accurate reconstructions of their reality? The people preserved in Pompeii's volcanic ash have become symbols, icons used to illustrate points about Roman society, family values, human nature, and historical tragedy. We have created narratives about them, given them identities, and used their deaths to tell stories about the ancient world. But the DNA reveals that these people were far more complex, far more diverse, and far different from the identities we assigned them. They were real individuals with genetic connections to places we never imagined, relationships we never understood, and experiences we completely missed. The man we called a woman, the strangers we called family, the locals who were actually immigrants from across the Mediterranean. Each one challenges us to admit how much we have been wrong about and how much remains unknown. That is what is disturbing about the Pompeii DNA discoveries. Not that the science is wrong. The science is revealing truth. What is disturbing is that nearly everything we thought we knew about these people, confidently stated in textbooks and museum displays for over a century, was based on assumption, bias, and guesswork rather than fact. The victims of Mount Vesuvius died in 79 AD. But in a sense, we killed them again over the past 150 years by burying them under layers of false narratives and mistaken interpretations. The DNA is finally letting them tell their own stories. And those stories are far more complex, far more troubling, and far more human than the myths we created about them. That is what scientists found when they extracted DNA from Pompeii victims. That is why what they discovered is not just disturbing. It is a fundamental challenge to how we understand ancient history, archaeological interpretation, and the stories we tell about the past.